Welcome to Should I Read It? Should I Read It is a weekly podcast that takes a deep dive into books. I'll provide a summary of the book and tell you how the ideas in the book relate across all the books we've covered so far. Today in episode 22, we're going to look at a parable that is used by Patrick Lencioni as a way to teach us how teams should work. We've all seen teams that are terrible. Teams that fought and backstabbed. Teams where no one bought into the vision of the company. Unfortunately, many of us have only seen teams that are broken like this. We haven't seen teams that have constructive arguments and then align around the decisions that have been made. We haven't seen teams that trust each other and genuinely enjoy spending time together. The goal of 5 Dysfunctions of a Team by Patrick Lencioni is to show us what a good team looks like. Lencioni's business writing is not like most others. He wraps up his stories in a parable to illustrate the points he's making. In this book, he follows a startup that is suffering. They've moved the founder or CEO out of the leadership role and brought in a new CEO. Our new CEO is the one that brings the new model of teamwork to everyone through a set of weekend retreats with the leadership of the company. As with other Lencioni books I've read, he ends the book with a wrap-up of the principles that we are getting taught by his different characters throughout the book. I'll tell you what his 5 Dysfunctions of a Team are right now. First is the absence of trust. Second is fear of conflict. Third is lack of commitment. Fourth is avoidance of accountability. And fifth is inattention to results. Each of these dysfunctions builds on the others. Lencioni gives us a pyramid diagram early in the book to illustrate this. If you check the show notes, you'll find my reproduction of it. Now, let's dive into the dysfunctions and see how they connect with each other so that we can start building better teams. Dysfunction 1 was the absence of trust. That's where teamwork starts. Trust means that team members can talk to each other and trust that what they say won't come back to harm them later. Here's how Lencioni puts it. Team members who are not genuinely open with one another about their mistakes and weaknesses make it impossible to build a foundation of trust. Without this trust, you have a team full of backbiting and everyone looking out only for themselves. They won't care about what's best for the company as a whole. They'll just fight for them, even if that fight harms the goals of the company. So how does one achieve trust? Well, it's hard because we've mostly been taught that we're in competition with everyone around us and that we need to step on others to move up this proverbial ladder. Again, here's a quote from Lencioni. Achieving vulnerability-based trust is difficult because in the course of career advancement and education, most successful people learn to become competitive with their peers and protective of their reputations. It is a challenge for them to turn those instincts off for the good of a team, but that is exactly what is required. Building the trust you want takes time. It's going to take shared experience. One of the best teams that I ever worked with was at a kayaking store. On top of working together every day, most of us spent a lot of our weekends and evenings on the river and even rescuing each other sometimes. We had a huge shared experience and lots of trust because it all rescued everyone. That meant at work, the trust continued. While we did have a hierarchy, it was fairly fluid and everyone was ready to dive in to help each other no matter what your real job description was. And here's another quote from Lencioni. How does a team go about building trust? Unfortunately, vulnerability-based trust cannot be achieved overnight. It requires shared experiences over time, multiple instances of follow-through and credibility, and an in-depth understanding of unique attributes of team members. If you operate a remote company, that means you hold get-togethers regularly, not just once a year, but at least quarterly. Chip and Dan Heath echo this idea in their book, The Power of Moments, when they say, remote contact is perfectly suitable for day-to-day communication and collaboration, but a big moment needs to be shared in person. No one dials into a wedding or funeral or graduation after all. The presence of others turns abstract ideas into social reality. You need to turn your team into a reality by sharing experiences and interactions. The time you spend regularly meeting will mean that when you're operating remotely, you're going to trust each other. Trusting each other will mean that they have good conflict with each other. And you want conflict because out of that is where you get the ideas that will push the business forward. Dysfunction 2 is the fear of conflict. Let's start with a quote from Lencioni. Teams that lack trust are incapable of engaging in unfiltered and passionate debate of ideas. Instead, they resort to veiled discussions and guarded comments. Most of us have been on a team where 99% of what was going on in the room was never spoken, where people disagreed, but they wouldn't say anything because they just didn't feel safe. Oh, sure, later they'd feel free to let loose on whomever was around. They talk about how they knew this was a bad idea right from the beginning. Assuming we have trust in our teams, the next step is to kill the dim view so often taken of conflict. Far from being a bad thing, constructive conflict is a refinery for ideas. Good challenge means that our ideas are forced to hold up to rigorous debate. We are forced to produce numbers to back ourselves up. In this type of company where conflict is considered healthy, We get to stop wasting time avoiding disagreement and instead we embrace it. Here's a quote from Lencioni. Unfortunately, conflict is considered taboo in many situations, especially at work. And the higher you go up the management chain, the more you find people spending inordinate amounts of time and energy trying to avoid the kind of passionate debates that are essential to any great team. By having good arguments, we make decisions happen. We don't waffle around issues wondering what on earth is going to happen and passively championing our point. We make a decision and move forward together because the whole team feels like their idea was heard. Here's another quote from Lencioni. Contrary to the notion that teams waste time and energy arguing, those that avoid conflict actually doom themselves to revisiting issues again and again and again without resolution. Mark Manson echoes this in his book called The Subtle Art of Not Giving a... You can guess the word there. And he says, without conflict, there can be no trust. Conflict exists to show us who is there for us unconditionally and who is there just for the benefits. No one trusts yes men. Manson actually takes this idea just a little bit further than Lencioni, as he feels he worked hard to avoid negative experiences. This is in part to the fake good life we see from so many on social media. Here's how Manson says it. Now, there's a problem in our society today. Through the wonders of consumer culture and hey, look at my life is cooler than yours, social media has bred a whole generation of people who believe that having these negative experiences, anxiety, fear, guilt, is totally not okay. That means that after you start building trust, you need to get everyone on board with the idea that conflict is something that will happen. And it's a good thing. If you don't have some healthy conflict around the ideas you want to pursue, you're leaving the best ones on the table. With good conflict, you can move on to dysfunction 3, a lack of commitment from your team in the decisions that have been made. Let's start lack of commitment with a quote from Lencioni. Without having aired their opinions in the course of passionate and open debate, team members rarely, if ever, buy in and commit to decisions, though they may feign agreement during meetings. I've seen this with my kids. When you dictate something to them, it's just a fight. When they get some say in the decision and the outcomes, they buy in a lot more. Now, yeah, they're totally kids. It often still takes some cajoling, but much less if they are on board with the original decision-making process. Here's another quote from Lencioni. Great teams make clear and timely decisions and move forward with a complete buy-in from every team member, even those who voted against the decision. You've also seen this idea in Great at Work by Morton Hansen. Here's how Hansen puts it. In teams that unite, team members commit to the decision taken, even if they disagree, and all work hard to implement the decision without second-guessing or undermining it. Hansen calls it the idea of fight then unite. This means that we fight about an idea and then we unite around the decision, even if we were on the other side. The other big thing that comes from not fighting and uniting around a decision is lack of decisions. We delay because we never feel great about it and fall into the trap of perfection. No decision is going to be perfect. The best we can hope for is a good decision with the information we had at the given time and the state of the business. Move forward with that decision, and if you get new information, go look back at the decision again. Now, with people uniting around a decision, we bring you to our next dysfunction, which is accountability. To bring accountability to your team, end every meeting and offsite with an explicit list of what everyone is responsible for. Without this step, you'll often find that people were not clear about what they were in charge of. Here's how Lencioni puts it. Without committing to a clear plan of action, even the most focused and driven people often hesitate to call their peers on actions and behaviors that seem counterproductive to the good of the team. Really, who can hold someone accountable to something that they didn't know about? When I used to manage a climbing gym, I'd find little things off in what our staff were doing sometimes. I'd always start with the assumption that they hadn't been told yet and it was my fault that something was off. I'd always follow up with a statement that they had now been told, so next time it was their fault. Here's another quote from Lencioni. The essence of this dysfunction is the unwillingness of team members to tolerate the interpersonal discomfort that accompanies calling a peer on his or her behavior and the more general tendency to avoid difficult conversations. I'm not going to quote Mark Manson again, but this lack of accountability goes back to his thoughts on avoiding anything that is negative. It is uncomfortable to tell someone that they're missing their mark, but that is part of the job you have to do if you want to have a successful team. It also means you got to cut out all ambiguity from your goals. And better than before, Gretchen Rubin tells us that if we want to achieve a habit, we must cut out all ambiguity. If we are ambiguous, then we'll give ourselves an out and the habit's not going to form. Lencioni follows the same reasoning when he says, the enemy of accountability is ambiguity, and even when a team has initially committed to a plan or a set of behavioral standards, it is important to keep those agreements in the open so that no one can easily ignore them. If we are ambiguous, then it's hard to focus on the results because too many things were just not clear. Finally, dysfunction 5, the inattention to results. Let's dive in as we have with a quote from Lencioni right to start. Inattention occurs when team members put their individual needs, such as ego, career development, or recognition, or even the needs of their divisions above the collective goals of the team. This starts to bring us full circle again as we look back at lack of trust. meaning that we look to our own desires most and put them above the needs of the company. If the whole company isn't focused around the same results, then they'll look to their teams and themselves only. What will make them the best they can be? What will cast them in the most favorable light? How can they get ahead? Here's another quote from Lencioni now. Every good organization specifies what it plans to achieve in a given period, and these goals, more than the financial metrics that they drive, make up the majority of near-term controllable results. While profit may be the ultimate measure of results in a corporation, the goals and objectives that executives set for themselves along the way constitute a more representative example of the results it strives for as a team. What's the one metric that matters to your company? What's the one that matters to your team, that contributes to the overall metric for the company? Are you willing to put your metric on hold to make sure that the company achieves the one thing that matters to it? Are you rewarding the type of behavior that leads to the single metric that matters in your teams? Let's finish off our look at a book with one final quote from Lencioni. How does a team go about ensuring that its attention is focused on results? By making the results clear, and by rewarding only those behaviors and actions that contribute to those results. This episode of Should I Read It is brought to you by the 8-Week Business Bootcamp. If you're tired of struggling with your business, tired of not getting the traction you want, tired of working overtime with little to show for it, then Bootcamp is for you. Join me to get your business back on track and still have time to see your family. You'll find a link for Bootcamp in the show notes. Now our final question. Should I read The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team? If you struggle reading business books because you find so many of them boring, then The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team is a great read. By showing you the dysfunctions first through a story, you get to see them in action. Sure, sometimes the scenes feel a little bit contrived, but they're going to get the point across. Lencioni finishes the book with a summary of the dysfunctions, followed by a set of questions to walk through with your team. If you're tight on time, then you could skip to the end of this and just get the information out of it. I think the story helps make the dysfunctions real though, so it will be more effort to keep them on top of mind long term if you just jump to the end. The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team is a quick read, and yes, if you deal with a team in any fashion, you should read it. Thanks for listening to Should I Read It? To support the show, you can leave me a review in iTunes or a heart or a star in whatever podcast player you use. These help more people find the show. If you want to get more reading done, you should get an Audible membership. If you use curtismchale.ca/recommends/audible, that will help the production of the show financially.